She has the dual perspective of the humanities and the natural sciences. She has a perspective of an engaged activist and the perspective of a detached thinker. So she really, in her life and in her work, she combines what we try to achieve as a goal. Not let other people tell us that we cannot have it all. We can have it all. We can be activists and thinkers. We can go in new directions, and we can appreciate what has been done before. There's no reason that academia tries to tell us we have to choose. We don't have to choose. So please welcome Donna Haraway.
Thank you. I think you just proved what I've always feared, which is basically this is a comic engagement. Thank you very much, both. That was exceedingly nice, and I appreciate also the invitation, as Rustin does too, to return, because we have found this a remarkably rich community and a real honor. Now, I talk under the sign of the dog of perfect proportions, the Vitruvian dog. Sidney Harris is Leonardo da Vinci's dog, because as in that period affectionately remembered as the Renaissance or the birth of early modern Europe, that moment when genius, art, science, and money converged in a particularly powerful way in the figure of man, I believe there is a similar implosion today in the figure of the dog. And so I give to you today a lecture that I'm calling the Companion Species Manifesto, Dogs, People, and Significant Otherness. But before beginning that lecture, I need to say a little bit about my theory and method. I've not grown up in a program called The History of Consciousness for nothing. So if I could have the second slide, I would like to say something about that pathway which I have left behind. This is a meeting at the American Association of American Lapdogs, and the keynote speaker is saying, ladies and gentlemen, behold the enemy. For a long time, as some of you know, I have written about entities, figures called cyborgs, because they seem to me to somehow deal with the implosion of informatics and biologics in the life worlds of technoscience and technoculture, which are everywhere, although not everything. But I have changed my allegiances and gone utterly to the dogs. With Nietzsche, who I think would have followed. Heidegger, I think, would have demurred, and perhaps remained where he did, to his shame. But Nietzsche would have followed. Now, if I could have the next slide, please. I would like to point out my single theoretical point with this slide. Those of you looking for the language of theory had best pay attention now, because it will pass. I have here an advertisement for a sheep and cattle wormer, a frucicide and vermicide that reverses the order of things in the way any deconstructionist act will do. This is one of many jokes to point out that reversals are never simply reversals, whether you're talking about the vermicide, flucicide, or the photograph itself. We have here the talented border collies being penned by the mere you, and we have the International Sheepdog Championship. We have Thomas Longton from a family of Thomas Longtons. You can go on the internet and find Thomas Longtons born and dead, being born and dying for some centuries, all named Thomas Longton, including his brother. This Thomas Longton is the British International Sheepdog Trial Champion, who is advertising for Combinex, the sheep wormer, with his champion border collies. But we know, looking at this slide for a minute, that this is a picture composed with some of the early software for manipulating graphics on computers. These two dogs, for example, are actually the same beings as these two dogs, but from a different shot. The sheep herself is molded in from a different picture. The sheep in the pasture are also molded in. This is a constructed picture. This is a picture that never happened, although it comes much closer to having happened than the next slide does, because that image hit the internet and went through yet another series of reversals, some of them literal from left to right, others a kind of airbrushing in on the Dutch Windmill onto the Lancashire countryside. I assure you that windmill is not there. And when Thomas Longton saw it on his countryside, he simply asked for a bit more money for the use of his landscape. Now, I use this slide to deal with the problem with what I consider my method, which is a kind of just barely literal, just barely beyond the literal joking method. to point out the kinds of reversals and copyings and mimetic acts that give us a hint about where we're located in technoscience. Now, if I could have the next slide. I think it's incumbent upon any scholar to locate her point of view. And so I consider myself to be this wolf with the telemetric apparatus, the remote transmitting apparatus, sending and receiving messages remotely in a transnational world. She has friends among the natural habitants of the planet, and one of those friends is introducing her to the pack, saying essentially, be generous to this scholar, this observer of your life ways. We found her wandering at the edge of the forest. She was raised by scientists. Insofar as I have a methodology, you now have it. Now, my manifesto, the Companion Species Manifesto, begins with a series of journal entries that I have subtitled Notes of a Sports Writer's Daughter. My father was a baseball, basketball, and football writer for the Denver Post for many years. I learned to score before I learned to read. I was expelled from the press box about the time I started menstruating. I didn't then quite understand why that was a moment I needed to leave the press box. Title IX was not yet in place. I have subsequently, because of Judith Butler and a number of other deep thinkers, understood the apparatuses of subject formation and gender production, and I know that that moment of no longer having access to free soft drinks in the press box was a kind of coming into female gender with a vengeance that I could no longer deal with willfully. So I have written a series of notes called Notes to a Sports Writer's Daughter in an attempt to convince, convict by the Holy Spirit, in an attempt to convince my father that the important sports in this world, the ones that ought to displace Monday Night Football, are in fact dog sports, such as the one I am running with my dog that you will hear all too much about, as opposed to a yet further deeper inquiry into Heidegger and Nietzsche. So, Ms. Cayenne Pepper continues to colonize all my cells. A sure case of what biologist Lynn Margulis calls symbiogenesis. I bet if you checked our DNA, you'd find some potent transfections between us. Her saliva must have the viral vectors. Surely her darter tongue kisses have been irresistible. Even though we share placement in the phylum of vertebrates, we inhabit not just different genres and divergent families, but altogether different orders. How would we sort things out? Canid, hominid, pet, professor, bitch, woman, animal, human, athlete, handler. One of us has a microchip injected under her neck skin for identification. The other has a photo ID California driver's license. One of us has a written record of her ancestors for 20 generations. One of us does not know her great-grandparents' names. One of us, product of a vast genetic mixture, is called purebred. One of us, equally product of a vast mixture, is called white. Each of these names designates a racial discourse, and we both inherit their consequences in our flesh. One of us is at the cusp of flaming, youthful, physical achievement. The other is lusty, but over the hill. And we play a team sport called agility on the same expropriated native land where Cayenne's ancestors herded merino sheep. These sheep were imported from the already colonial pastoral economy of Australia to feed the California Gold Rush 49ers. In layers of history, layers of biology, layers of nature cultures, complexity is the name of our game. We are both the freedom-hungry offspring of conquest, products of white settler colonies, leaping over hurdles and crawling through tunnels on the playing field. I'm sure our genomes are more alike than they should be. There must be some molecular record of our touch in the codes of living that will leave traces in the world, no matter that we are each reproductively silenced females, one by age and choice, one by surgery and coercion. Her red merle Australian shepherd's quick and lithe tongue has swabbed the tissues of my tonsils with all their eager immune system receptors. Who knows where my chemical receptors carried her messages, or what she took from my cellular system for distinguishing self from other and binding outside to inside. We have had forbidden conversation. We have had oral intercourse. We are bound in telling story upon story with nothing but the facts.